the workability and disadvantage arguments of legalizing brothels. The first workability argument is that it promotes sex trafficking. On a report by an article from Janice Raymond, it says that it states that a report done for the governmental Budapest group stated that 80% of women in brothels in the Netherlands are trafficked from other countries. It goes on to say that the Netherlands promotes itself as a champion of anti-trafficking policies and programs, yet cynically has removed any legal impediment to pimping, procurement, and brothels. In the year 2000, the Dutch Ministry of Justice argued for a legal quota of foreign sex workers, but the Dutch prostitution market demands a variety of bodies. Also in the year 2000, the Dutch government sought and received a judgment from the European Court recognizing prostitution as an economic activity, thus enabling women from the EU and former Soviet bloc countries to obtain working permits as sex workers in the Dutch sex industry if they can prove they are self-employed. The NGOs in the Netherlands have stated that traffickers are taking advantage of this ruling by bringing foreign women into the Dutch prostitution industry by masking the fact that women have been trafficked, and by coaching the women how to prove they are self-employed migrant sex workers. As for the second reason that it should not be legalized is that it expands the sex industry. Over the last decade, in the same article by Janice Raymond, it says over the last decade, as pimping became legalized in the brothels and then brothels decriminalized in the Netherlands in 2000, the sex industry expanded 25%. And then it goes on and says, at any hour of the day, women of all ages, dressed in hardly anything, are put on display in the notorious windows of Dutch brothels and sex clubs and offered for sale for male consumption. Most of the women from other countries who have all in likelihood been trafficked into the Netherlands. And then going into the third reason that it simply wouldn't work is that women make up the majority of the prostitutes. You don't hear about the male prostitutes, and the women and the female prostitutes don't want it to be legal. In an article, it said, in the same article, it says that many women do not want it to be legal because they don't want to undergo the health checks as required by law in certain countries. My opponent stated how many street prostitutes already have STDs. That's going to put all of them out of work, which leads to more people that do not want it to be legalized. If they create this legislation, it's going to drive more women into street prostitution. Many women choose street prostitution because they want to avoid being controlled and exploited by the new sex businessmen. They don't want the risk of being trafficked or anything like that happening to them. In the Netherlands, women in prostitution point out that legislation or decriminalization of the sex industry cannot erase the stigma of prostitution, but instead makes women more vulnerable to abuse because they must register and they lose anonymity. And then in an article by the Night Rider Tribune, it says even more, some former prostitutes have begun calling for an end to legalized prostitution in Nevada, and a higher profile legal challenge by others has paved the way for widespread risk of advertising of brothels, raising the ear of some Nevada citizens. An anti-prostitution activist, Melissa Farley, goes on to say that I think we might actually be getting closer to seeing Nevada go the way of every other state in the nation and prohibiting legal prostitution. As for the disadvantages of legalizing prostitution, the first disadvantage is simply the image of brothels and the location themselves. Among the people fighting brothels are nearby businessmen. In Middleton, Rhode Island, where prostitution had been legal all the way up until this month, a local toy store relocated 40 minutes away in August after the owners grew frustrated with doing business near what they believed was a brothel. The owner, Mrs. Bomer, stated that people would automatically and immediately assume that the toy store was a front for the brothel, which drove them to relocate. And in the article stating this by the Wall Street Journal, in September of 2009, it said that Rhode Island lawmakers were pushing to pushing lawmakers to criminalize indoor prostitution, saying it damages state's reputation to certain neighbors, encourages sex trafficking, and puts women in potentially dangerous situations. Now, less than a month later, the legislation was passed, and Governor Don Carcieri signed the legislation Tuesday, November 3rd of 2009, banning indoor prostitution in the only other state besides Nevada where it was legal. The new law, which took effect immediately, makes prostitution a misdemeanor crime regardless of where it occurs. Prostitutes will face up to 6 months in prison for a first offense, while customers and prostitutes convicted of a subsequent offense could be punished by a maximum 1-year sentence. State officials hope the new law will help drive the brothels out of business, either because they will voluntarily shut down or are targeted by police. And then the second reason why, the second disadvantage of legalizing prostitution is that it makes it look okay and increases child prostitution. Legislation of prostitution sends a message to a new generation of men and boys that women are sexual commodities and that prostitution is harmless fun. In reality, and then as for the fact that it increased child prostitution, the Netherlands has increased dramatically from the 1990s, and the Amsterdam Child Rate Organization estimates that the number went from 4,000 children in 1996 to 15,000 in 2001. That's an 80% increase in those 5 years alone. And if that same rate increased up to now, 8 years later, there would be over 40,000 children in prostitution where it's legal. Child prostitutes has dramatically risen in Victoria, Australia, compared to other Australian states where prostitution has not been legalized. In a 1998 study undertaken by EdCact and Child Prostitution Trafficking, who conducted research for Australian National Inquiry into Child Prostitution, there was increased evidence of organized commercial exploitation of children. There are simply too many reasons why it wouldn't work and why we should not have any form of legal prostitution, and I hope after hearing my speech that all of you realize that.